Hello, my name is Dr. Xiang Robert Li. I'm a professor of Temple University's Department of Tourism Hospitality Management and director of the U.S. Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research. My research mainly focuses on international destination marketing and tourist behavior. Today, I'm going to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on global travel and tourism. This is a speaker series about how COVID-19 is affecting key aspects of business and globalization. With these short videos, we hope to provide you with valuable and relevant insights about industry and commerce that will help you to understand and better navigate the turbulent waters ahead. This series is sponsored by the Temple University Center for International Business Education and Research, CIBER, which is housed in the Fox School of Business here at Temple. In this short video, I will provide a brief overview of the COVID-19 impacts on the global and U.S. tourism economy. I will also talk about some estimated changes in tourist behavior as a result of the pandemic, and how the industry may cope with the crisis. I will mainly talk about travel and tourism, and another colleague of mine, Dr. Corridwin King, will address the hospitality industry in a separate video. As you may have known, the travel and tourism sector is an extremely important part of our global tour economy. In 2018, the sector contributes nearly $9 trillion to global economy and generated over 10% of all global economic activities. The sector accounted for 319 million jobs, or about 10% of total employment in the world. Most notably, the travel and tourism industry is a GDP multiplier industry, meaning that when tourists buy airfares or stay in hotels, the money they spend will be circulated in the destination economy and indirectly benefit many other sectors. By the same token, when the travel and tourism industry suffers from a major crisis, it could also have ripple effects to other sectors as well. Unfortunately, during this pandemic, the travel and tourism industry has been the hardest hit sector by pandemic. The industry suffered a lot due to various reasons. For example, many governments imposed various travel bans or border closures or national lockdowns. Many firms and institutions take proactive measures to avoid infection and cut their business travel plans. And individuals reduce leisure travel and other related activities as well. Because of all these, many airplanes are grounded, lots of cruise ships are docked, and numerous famous tourist destinations are empty and quiet. The United Nations World Tourism Organization estimates international tourist arrivals could decline by 20 to 30% in 2020. To put this into perspective, let me tell you this. International tourism has consistently enjoyed healthy growth since World War II. Before this pandemic, global tourism growth has been outpacing the global economy for 8 years in a row. In the past 2 decades, we only saw 2 small declines. In 2003, the SARS outbreak led to a decline of just 0.4%. And in 2009, the global economic crisis led international tourist arrivals decline by about 4%. In other words, a 20 to 30% decline of global tourism in a year is almost unheard of in the modern tourism history. This would translate into a loss of 300 to 450 billion US dollars in international tourism receipts. This would wipe out 5 to 7 years tourism growth, and the global tourism will go back to the 2012 to 2014 level. Why is that? Well, pretty much all the previous crises we have seen in the modern tourism history were either regional or temporary. The current pandemic is much more global, and it covers a much longer period, so it's going to be much more damaging than ever. Just to give you some examples reported by OECD, one of the hardest hit sectors within the tourism industry is aviation. On March the 16th, the International Air Transport Association reported that around 150 governments in the world have imposed some forms of travel restrictions. On March 24th, IATA estimated 2020 global revenue losses for the passenger business would be up to 252 billion US dollars, which is almost half, nearly half of the 2019 figure. Another sector that was hit really hard is the cruise industry. As you have heard, multiple cruise ships had COVID-19 outbreaks. So the industry faces losses in booking and revenue, and they have announced a voluntary suspension of global operation. The 3 major cruise lines, their stocks dropped as much as 80% in the past month also. What about the tour operators? Well, a recent survey of nearly 600 tour operators and travel-related companies also provides some really alarming facts. The tour operators are reducing or halting operations. In Europe, the crisis could cause a reduction of business for tour operators of at least 50% in 2020. And the holiday resorts are also facing unprecedented pressure. The ski resorts were forced to end their winter season earlier due to the increasing coronavirus spread. And the future for beach resorts in the Northern Hemisphere is still very much uncertain at this point. Another sector that has been hit very hard is the sharing economy. The virus outbreak is putting transport and accommodation platforms such as Uber and Airbnb under extreme pressure. This crisis is actually highlighting the need to regulate gig economy workers and people dependent on these platforms for income. How about the impact on the US tourism economy? Well, in the United States, travel and tourism contributes about 3% of the country's GDP, and it is the country's #1 service export. It supports about 9 million jobs, and the impact of COVID-19 on American tourism has also been very overwhelming and immediate. According to the latest statistic in early April, in almost 50 states, the previous week's average travel and tourism business revenue declined substantially compared to the same week in 2019. From the consumer perspective, there's clearly negative sentiment in the United States market. According to a survey by Boston Consulting Group, American consumers are quite concerned about travel since the outbreak. They're reluctant to travel either internationally or domestically. They're concerned about taking a cruise taking a domestic flight, visiting a theme park or casino, or just simply staying in a hotel. This suggests that the majority of US customers will cut spending on either domestic or international travel. It has been estimated there will be about $400 billion decline in travel spending in the US this year. And that will translate into a total economic loss of $910 billion in economic output. That is more than 7 times of the impact of September 11 on the travel sector. And the US economy will likely lose about 6 million jobs as a result of travel declines. Then, what does the end game look like? Well, I don't have the crystal ball, but I have seen numerous predictions. After the initial uncertainty and confusion and controversy, most experts agree that there will essentially be two likely scenarios. The first is basically a slow recovery. The virus continues to spread across the Middle East, Europe, and the United States until about May or early June 2020. And then the virus doesn't gain a foothold in Africa or Latin America. And if that happens, and that means the pandemic is contained largely due to the virus seasonality combined with a very strong public health response. The second scenario is probably the worst case scenario, is that the outbreak lingers for a long time and make deep inroads into nearly every single country in the world. And we will wait until either a vaccine can be produced or that we reach some kind of herd immunity. In that case, the health system will be overwhelmed and there will be large-scale human and economic impacts. And regardless, in either case, the international tourism economy will suffer tremendously. The domestic tourism economy will probably pick up sooner than international tourism. And that is heavily dependent on how each national government decides on their restriction on people's mobility. And no matter what, domestic tourism growth will not be able to offset the decline of international tourism flows. So this will translate into significant macroeconomic effects into countries and the destinations, particularly those destinations who are heavily dependent on tourism. All the numbers and facts I just reported sounds pretty gloomy. You probably would ask, should we be totally pessimistic about the market outlook? Well, the answer is no. History has shown repeatedly tourism is sensitive but resilient. Indeed, analysis of previous major epidemics shows that the average recovery time for destinations usually is under 20 months. Indeed, analysis of previous major epidemics showed that the average recovery time for visitor numbers to a destination would be under 20 months. So even though that we know that this pandemic is like no other and its impact will be unprecedented, we still do believe there's light at the end of the tunnel. With the right response and management, tourism industry will rebound and rebound fast. So what will the post-pandemic tourism landscape look like? I would say that, first of all, for all destinations and tourism service providers, we have to be conscious that travel is never going to be the same in the foreseeable future. And priorities are going to change. And tourist behaviors and mindset will change. Let me just give you some examples of the trends that we have either observed based on some early signals from Asian countries, or that the experts predict that will happen. Most likely, number one, the trend will be localism, meaning that tourists will be more comfortable traveling locally, or at least travel domestically. I would say that they would pursue a lighter version of traveling comparing to previous time. That the tourists will choose shorter excursions, shorter vacations, and they will pursue a DIY style of travel and tourism accommodations, meaning that they will choose private transportation, private accommodation. When they have a chance, they will drive their own car instead of taking public transportation. If they have a chance, if they have the opportunity, they will probably camp or stay in the RV instead of using hotels. And they will most likely prefer nature destinations, remote destinations, and outdoor activities. And we will see the revival of camping, or what they call glamping, the glamorous camping, coming back to the market. For service providers, I think at least we have three magic tools. First one is price. That's with good pricing strategy, and we can present customers some really attractive packages with good value. Second is flexibility in booking, meaning that the travel and tourism industry can work closely with the insurance industry and the public health industry, coming up with different types of insured travel packages and provide customers the maximum flexibility when they book their travel. And also the third tool that we need to use is improved sanitation practices and cleanliness monitoring. Meaning that the coronavirus crisis had made consumers more aware of the importance of health and safety. So it is extremely important to meet their safety needs and build up their consuming confidence in the short term. With that, it means basically push the industry to upgrade its health and the cleanliness standard, and make sure that we clearly communicate whatever measures we're taking to ensure guests' hygiene and cleanliness. We will effectively communicate this and assure them everything is clean and safe. The third trend that we are seeing is that brand matters and brand pays. Why is that? Well, if you think about brand means trust. After the crisis, particularly at the initial stage, tourists will be more comfortable buying from those reliable, well-recognized brands. Companies who have in the past invested heavily in engaging and bonding with customers, who have delivered on their promises, they were more likely to survive and succeed. Another trend that we're seeing is actually, I believe, is a silver lining of this crisis, is technology and innovation, because we understand during crisis, consumers and business will be more receptive to more innovative and technology and radical technological innovations. So from online shopping to mobile payments, most likely after the epidemic that there will be some demand driven by customers' health and safety concerns that will push the industry to adopt more innovation and structure forms. And so from both sides, from the demand side and from the supply side, we will see more technological breakthroughs. Indeed, we have seen in some countries, in Asian countries, that hotel groups and online platforms are leading the implement of some kind of countless or zero contact, zero touch services by using things like self-service check-in, keyless entry, indoor delivery robots. So basically, while they are trying to reduce person-to-person contact, these businesses are forced to take on new technological solutions. Another area that could be affected is this so-called over-tourism phenomenon. As you know, there are many destinations, popular destinations in the world that have been overburdened by tourism. This crisis actually gives them an opportunity for the local discussion and soul searching. The local residents will be more conscious about how much they have been benefiting from or relying upon tourism. And with that information, they need to discuss and make a sober decision on the future of their community. From a social political perspective, we will likely see more stigma and discrimination against the Asian tourists. Actions taken by each country during this pandemic could have a long-lasting effect on the interrelationship between these countries, which will then have an effect on the international tourism between these countries. So we need to be very proactive and strongly fight against stigma and discrimination and try to fix the damaged relationship between some of the countries. And finally, to all of us, this crisis could turn out to be a transformative experience. It could affect how we view the world, how we view relationship, and our life. The silver lining, for example, for me, of this lockdown experience is actually it enhanced my family bonding. Indeed, we will likely see that at the industry level that we will see more family travel packages gaining momentum after the pandemic. As you can see, for many destinations and tourism business, this pandemic is not just a pause, that after which we can simply go back to normal. This crisis is a test of our competence and call for revolutionary, not evolutionary, reform of the industry. It requires all the service providers, all the destinations to come up with new strategies, innovative business models, and creative solutions. So for the tourism industry, let's be ready to press the reset button.